Welcome to the Royal Griot. We are so honored to have you here with us today. To our loyal subscribers and our new viewers, thank you for your incredible support. You are the reason we tell these stories. Before we continue, please drop a comment below and let us know which part of the world you are watching from. We love connecting with our global family. Now, let us begin. The leather of my limousine smelled of success, a scent I had worked 18 hours a day for a decade to afford. In the boardroom of Mokoena Holdings, I was known as the Iron Lion of Josie. I was cold-hearted, calculated, and possessed a fortune that could buy half the city. I had private jets waiting on the tarmac at Ortambo and a mansion in Pretoria that felt more like a museum than a home. I had everything. "Sir, should I call the police to move her?" my driver, Sifo, asked, his voice cautious. He knew my reputation. I didn't tolerate loitering. I didn't tolerate weakness. "Wait," I whispered. My throat felt like it was filled with broken glass. I stepped out of the car. The rain immediately soaked through my three-piece Italian suit, but I didn't feel the cold. I walked toward her. She was shivering, wrapped in a thin, filthy blanket that had seen better decades. Her shoes were held together by duct tape and prayer. This was Zinhle, the daughter of a wealthy family who had once looked down on me because I was just a poor boy from the township with big dreams and empty pockets. "Zinhle," I said, the name tasting like a forgotten prayer. She didn't look up at first. She was clutching a small plastic bag to her chest like it held gold. "I'm leaving, Mynheer. I'm sorry. I just needed the overhead cover for a moment. Please don't take my bag." "Look at me," I commanded, my billionaire's authority slipping for the first time in years. When she finally raised her head, the shock that went through me was physical. Her beautiful face was gaunt. Her skin, once the color of rich honey, was dull and scarred by the harsh life of the streets. But it was her, my secret admirer from my university days, the woman who had eventually become my world, only to vanish into night when my first business venture collapsed and I was left with nothing but debt. "Thabo," she whispered. Her voice was a raspy ghost of the melody I remembered. She blinked, looking at my suit, then at the towering skyscraper behind me that bore my family name in giant, glowing letters. "Thabo Mokoena? What happened to you?" I demanded. My voice was loud, echoing against the marble pillars of my empire. "Where is your father's money? Where is the doctor you were supposed to marry? Why are you sitting in the dirt outside my office?" She flinched as if I'd struck her. A flash of the old Zinhle. The pride, the fire, flickered in her eyes for a split second before dying out. "Life happened, Thabo. Destiny is a cruel master. You left me when I was struggling." I shouted, the bitterness I'd suppressed for 10 years bubbling over. "I was betrayed by you." I sat in my mother's shack and waited for a letter, a call, anything. And now look at us. I am the king of this city, and you are a mysterious stranger haunting my doorstep. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She simply began to gather her things, her hands trembling violently from the cold or the shame. I couldn't tell which. "You're right. You won, Thabo. You have your fortune. You have your empire. I'll go. I won't ruin your view anymore." She tried to stand, but her legs gave way. She collapsed into the puddle at my feet. Sifo rushed forward to help, but I held up a hand. My mind was a whirlwind of rage and a sudden, terrifying surge of the soft-hearted boy I used to be. "Get her into the car." I snapped. "Sir." Sifo looked at her tattered clothes and then at the pristine cream interior of the Maybach. Did I stutter? "Put her in the car. Now." I watched as my driver lifted her. She was so light, frighteningly light, as if she were made of nothing but air and regrets. As she was placed into the back seat, she gripped her plastic bag tighter. "Don't touch it," she hissed at Sifo, a momentary spark of desperation returning. I sat opposite her in the limousine, the silence between us heavy with the weight of a decade of silence. I looked at this woman who had once been my everything. I should have felt triumph. I should have enjoyed the sight of my former betrayer brought low while I sat on a throne of gold. But all I felt was a hollow ache in my chest. "I'm taking you to my house," I said coldly, not because I've forgiven you, but because I want you to see exactly what you walked away from. I want you to see the miracle I built without you. Zinhle looked out the window at the neon lights of Johannesburg, her reflection ghost-like against the glass. She didn't look impressed by the luxury. She looked exhausted. I never walked away because you were poor, Thabo, she whispered so softly I almost missed it over the sound of the engine. Liar. I barked. Your father told me himself. He said you were disgusted by my failure. He said you had moved on to someone worthy of your status. She turned to look at me then, and for a moment, the billionaire and the beggar were just two people again. My father is dead, Thabo, and he died with more secrets than money. As we pulled to the massive iron gates of my Pretoria estate, the security guards saluting the car, Zinhle's eyes widened. The mansion was a masterpiece of modern architecture, lit up like a palace. Welcome to my home, I said, my voice dripping with ice. It's a long way from the township, isn't it? We stepped out of the car, and my house staff gathered at the door, their faces masked professional confusion as they saw the woman I was bringing inside. Prepare the guest suite in the West Wing. I ordered my housekeeper, Mrs. Gummead, and call my private doctor. Now. Zinhle stumbled as we entered the grand foyer. The plastic bag she had been clutching finally slipped from her fingers, hitting the polished marble floor. It tore open, and its contents spilled out across the tiles. I expected trash. I expected scraps of food or old rags. But as I looked down, my breath caught in my throat. Spilled across my floor were dozens of crumpled, yellowed pieces of paper. They were newspaper clippings. Every single one of them was an article about me. My first contract. My first million. My charitable donations. My face looked up from the floor 20 times over, and among them was a small, framed photograph. The glass cracked. It was a picture of me and her, 10 years ago, laughing in the sun. You kept these? I asked, my voice trembling. Zinhle reached down, her fingers shaking as she tried to scoop up the clippings. They were the only thing that kept me warm on the nights when the hunger was too much, she sobbed, collapsing onto the marble. I never stopped looking for you, Thabo. But I wasn't looking for the billionaire. I was looking for my Thabo. Suddenly, she gasped, clutching her stomach, her face turning a terrifying shade of gray. Before I could reach her, she lost consciousness, her head hitting the floor with a sickening thud. Zinhle! I screamed, the iron line vanishing as I felt my knees beside her. As I lifted her, a small envelope fell out of her tattered coat pocket. It was addressed to me, the ink faded but the handwriting unmistakably hers. It was dated the day she disappeared 10 years ago. I reached for it, but my doctor burst through the door, his medical bag in hand. Get her to the room, the doctor shouted. I stood there, the letter in one hand and the cracked photo of our past in the other, watching them carry the woman I hated, and realized I still desperately loved, away into the depths of my cold, lonely mansion. I looked at the envelope. The seal was still intact. What was in this letter that she had carried through the gutters of South Africa for 10 years? And why was she really homeless when her family had been the richest in the province? She's dying, Thabo. If you had found her even 2 days later, we would be preparing for a funeral, not a recovery. Dr. Naidu's words cut through the silence of my study like a jagged blade. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the manicured gardens of my Pretoria estate. The automated sprinklers were hissing, watering grass that cost more to maintain per month than a township family earned in a year. I felt a surge of nausea. I was a billionaire. I had built an empire from the dust of betrayal. Yet I couldn't even look the man in the eye. Is it just hunger? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Severe malnutrition, pneumonia, and exhaustion. Naidu replied, his tone clinical but laced with a hint of reproach. He had known me since I first made my fortune. He was the only one who dared to speak to the Iron Lion with anything other than trembling reverence. But there's more, Thabo. Her body is covered in old scars. This wasn't just a month of bad luck. Zinhle has been living in hell for years. What happened to the Cumulo family? They were royalty in the Casian business world. I don't know. I snapped, turning around. She disappeared. I thought she was living in a palace in Dubai or London with some high-flying doctor. That's what her father told me. Well, the only palace she's seen lately is the underside of a bridge, Nadu said, packing his stethoscope. She's stable for now, but she needs around-the-clock care. I've put her on an 4-drip. Don't wake her. She needs the sleep of the dead if she's ever going to live again. When the doctor left, the silence of the mansion became deafening. This house was my pride, a symbol of my victory over everyone who said a boy from the slums would never amount to anything. But as I looked at the ivory-colored walls and the expensive art, the space felt cold, empty. I looked down at the small, crumpled envelope I had taken from her coat. My hands, which had signed billion-rand contracts without a tremor, were shaking. I sat at my mahogany desk and carefully tore the edge. The paper inside was thin, yellowed, and smelled faintly of dampness and earth. The day at the top was from 10 years ago, the very night she vanished. My dearest Thabo, if you are reading this, it means I am gone and you probably hate me. I need you to know that every word my father told you tonight was a lie. I am not disgusted by your failure. I am not leaving because the business collapsed. I am leaving because he gave me a choice. I leave you and never see you again, or he uses his influence to ensure you spend the rest of your life in a maximum security prison for a fraud he has already framed you for. He has the dockets ready, Thabo. He has the police in his pocket. He told me that if I stay, he will destroy you until there is nothing left but a ghost. I cannot let him kill your light. You have a destiny, my lion. You are going to build things that will change our country. You are going to be the king I always knew you were. Please, do not look for me. If he sees us together, he will strike. Just know that I am yours, in this life and the next. I will carry your heart with me into the shadows. Forever, your Zinhle. The letter fell from my fingers. The air in the room felt thin, as if the oxygen had been sucked out. For 10 years, I had fueled my ambition with the dark coal of resentment. I had told myself that she was a shallow socialite who only loved me when the sun was shining. I had used that anger to climb the boardroom ladder, to crush my rivals, to become the cold-hearted man the world feared. I had built this entire fortune as a forget-you to a woman who had actually sacrificed her entire life to save mine. I'm a fool, I whispered into the empty room. A blind, arrogant fool. I stood up and walked toward the West Wing. The hallway felt miles long. When I reached the guest suite, the door was heavy, solid oak. I pushed it open quietly. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a bedside lamp. Zinhle looked like a broken doll against the silk sheets. In the harsh light of the limousine, she had looked old, but here in the stillness, I could see the girl she used to be. The curve of her jaw, the way her hair curled at her temples. But her hands were calloused and cracked. I pulled a chair to the side of the bed and sat down. I reached out, my fingers hovering over hers, afraid that if I touched her, she might shatter. Why didn't you come to me when he died? I asked her sleeping form. Once the old man was gone, why didn't you find me? I was everywhere. My face is on every billboard in Johannesburg. She didn't answer, of course. She just breathed a shallow, rattling sound that made my chest tighten. I stayed there for hours, watching the 4 drip steadily into her arm. I thought about the luxury she was currently surrounded by, the Egyptian cotton, the climate control, the security. To anyone else, this was a miracle, a second chance. But to me, it felt like an insult. I had so much, and she had nothing. Around 3 a.m., she began to stir. Her head tossed from side to side, and a low moan escaped her lips. "No, please," she muttered. "Not the bag. It's all I have. Thabo, I'm sorry." "I'm here, Zinhle," I said, leaning forward. I took her hand. It was burning hot with fever. "I'm right here. You're safe." Her eyes snapped open. They were bloodshot and unfocused, darting around the room in a panic. When they finally landed on me, she didn't see the billionaire. She didn't see the man who had just shouted at her in the rain. She saw a threat. She tried to scramble backward, her weak limbs tangling in the expensive sheets. "Where am I? Who are you? Let me go." "Zinhle, it's me. It's Thabo. You're in my house." She stopped, her breathing ragged. She looked at the room, the ornate crown molding, the crystal chandelier, the velvet curtains. A look of devastating shame crossed her face, and she pulled a blanket up to hide her tattered hospital gown, the one my staff had changed her into. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice cracking. I look like a monster in this beautiful room." "You look like the woman who saved my life," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I held up the letter. "I read it, Zinhle. I read what you did. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me hate you for 10 years? She looked at the letter and closed her eyes, tears leaking from the corners. "Because if you didn't hate me, you would have come looking for me. And if you came looking for me, my father would have destroyed you. I had to make sure you stayed away. Your success was my only comfort, Thabo. Every time I saw your face in a discarded newspaper, I knew I had made the right choice. I knew my sacrifice wasn't for nothing. Your father is dead, Zinhle. He's been gone for 3 years. Why didn't you come then?" She laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that chilled my blood. "My father didn't just lose his soul, Thabo. He lost everything. He gambled the family fortune on bad investments in Nigeria and Angola. When he died, the creditors took the house, the cars, even the clothes from my mother's closet. I had no education. He made sure of that. I had no friends. They all vanished when the money did. I was a cumulo. Who would hire a cumulo after the scandal? I would have," I roared, standing up, "I would have given you the world." "I was ashamed," she screamed back, the effort causing her to cough violently. "Look at me. I am a beggar. I have slept in doorways and eaten from bins. How could I walk into your boardroom looking like this? How could I ask for a second chance on the man I broke?" The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of our shared history. I looked at her, really looked at her, and the anger I had carried for a decade finally dissolved, replaced by a fierce, protective fire. "You aren't a beggar," I said, my voice low and steady. "You are the woman who made me a billionaire. Without your sacrifice, I would be in a prison cell. Everything I own, this house, the jets, the empire, it belongs to you as much as it belongs to me." "It's too late for us, Thabo," she whispered, her eyes fluttering shut as exhaustion claimed her again. "Too much time. Too much dirt." "It's never too late for destiny," I replied, though I wasn't sure she heard me. I walked over to her tattered coat, which was hanging over a chair. I reached into the pockets, looking for anything else, any other clue to her life. My fingers brushed against something hard and rectangular. I pulled it out. It was a small, leather-bound notebook. The pages were stuffed with more than just newspaper clippings. There were hand-drawn maps of the city, names of shelters, and a list of dates. But as I flipped to the back of the notebook, a folded legal document fell out. It was a birth certificate. I picked it up, my heart hammering against my ribs. I scanned the lines. Name of child: Thabo Cumulo JNR. Mother: Zinhle Cumulo. Father: Thabo Mokoena. The world tilted on its axis. I stared at the date of birth. He would be 9 years old. "Zinhle," I gasped, rushing back to the bed. "Zinhle, wake up. Where is he? Where's my son?" She didn't move. Her fever had spiked again, and she was slipping into a deep, unconscious delirium. I turned to the door, ready to scream for the doctor, for my security, for the whole world to stop. But as I reached the handle, my head of security, Petrus, knocked frantically. "Sir, forgive the intrusion, but there is a situation at the gate." "Not now, Petrus," I shouted. "Sir, you need to see this," he insisted, his voice sounding shaken. "A group of men in an unmarked van. They say they are looking for a debtor who stole something from them. They claim she's hiding here. They have a boy with them, sir, a young boy in chains." My blood turned to ice. My hands gripped the doorframe until my knuckles turned white. The Iron Lion was gone. In his place was a father who had just discovered he had a kingdom to defend. "Petrus," I said, my voice deathly quiet, "open the armory and tell those men, tell them that Thabo Mokoena is coming to collect what belongs to him. I have stared down hostile boards of directors. I have negotiated deals in backrooms where a single wrong word could cost a fortune. I have stood my ground against the most powerful men in Africa. But as I walked toward the massive iron gates of my estate, my legs felt like they were made of water. The metal groaned as the black SUV slammed into our rear flank again, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet afternoon. I was thrown against the door, my arm instinctively wrapping around Zinhle, to pull her onto the floor of the Maybach. This was no longer a boardroom battle of words and signatures. This was a desperate, high-speed hunt on the outskirts of Johannesburg. Sipho, don't let them box us in. I screamed over the screeching of tires. I'm trying, sir, but they got more horsepower, and they don't care about the paint. Sipho yelled back, his knuckles white as he fought the steering wheel. The SUV swerved, attempting to pit maneuver us toward the steep embankment that led down into a rocky ravine. I looked at Zinhle. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a terror I had promised she would never feel again. 10 years of struggling on the streets, surviving the cold and the hunger, and now, just as she found her miracle, the shadows were trying to swallow her whole. "Thabo, they're going to kill us," she whispered, her voice trembling against my chest. "No," I growled, the iron lion rising within me with a ferocity I had never felt. I spent 10 years building an empire, Zinhle. I didn't do it just to watch it burn on the side of a road. Trust me. Please trust me. I reached for my phone, but a third impact sent the device flying into the footwell. The SUV was persistent. It wasn't just trying to scare us. It was trying to erase us. I realized then that Elias Thorne wasn't just a greedy businessman. He was the head of a snake, and even with him in a cell, the body was still thrashing. These were his cleaners, the men who ensured that when a billionaire fell, he took his secrets to the grave. Sipho, the construction site at the Malabong interchange. I shouted, "Go there." "Sir, that's a dead end." "Just do it." Sipho didn't argue. He swung the heavy limousine onto 2 wheels as he took a sharp turn, the scent of burning rubber filling the cabin. We pushed through a barrier of orange cones, the Maybach suspension screaming as we hit the uneven dirt of an unfinished highway project. Dust exploded around us, a brown veil that temporarily blinded our pursuers. I scrambled for my phone, finally gripping it. I didn't call the police. I called Petrus, my head of security, who was still at the estate with my son. "Petrus, lock down the house. Do you hear me? Code red." "Sir? What's happening?" "We're being followed. They're trying to run us off the road." "Where's Thabo Mokoena?" "He's in the safe room with Mrs. Gummead, sir. The perimeter is secure. I have the tactical team on the walls. Don't let anyone in, not even if they have a badge." I hung up just as the SUV burst through the dust cloud behind us. They were gaining. The dirt road was narrowing, flanked by massive concrete pillars for a bridge that was only half built. Sipho was driving like a man possessed, weaving between piles of gravel and heavy machinery. The SUV pulled alongside us, the tinted window rolling down. I saw the glint of a barrel. "Get down!" I shoved Zinhle into the footwell and shielded her with my own body. The glass of the rear window shattered, showering us in diamonds of safety glass. Zinhle screamed, a sound that tore through my heart. This was the woman I had betrayed with my silence. This was the mother of my child. I felt a sharp sting in my shoulder, a piece of glass or a graze. I didn't know and I didn't care. "Sipho, the crane." I pointed ahead to a massive yellow tower crane standing near the edge of the unfinished bridge. Sipho saw it. He understood. He slammed on the brakes, the Maybach skidding in a 180-degree turn. The SUV, caught off guard by the sudden move, tried to brake, but the loose gravel acted like ball bearings. It slid past us, its tires spinning uselessly as it careened toward the edge where the road simply stopped. The driver of the SUV corrected at the last second, slamming into a concrete pylon instead of going over. The front of their vehicle crumpled like paper. "Go! Go! Go!" I urged. Sipho didn't wait. He floored it, heading back toward the main road. I looked back and saw 2 men stumbling out of the wrecked SUV, dazed and bleeding. They wouldn't be following us any time soon. But the victory felt hollow. My shoulder was throbbing, and Zinhle was shaking so hard I thought she might break. I pulled her back onto the seat checking her for injuries. She was covered in glass dust but physically unhurt. "It's over," I whispered, holding her face in my hands. "It's over, Zinhle." She looked at me, and for the first time, she saw the blood soaking through my silk shirt. Her eyes filled with tears. "You're hurt. Thabo, you're bleeding for me." "I'd bleed the whole Limpopo River for you," I said. And for the first time in my life, it wasn't a line from a drama. It was the absolute truth. I was a cold-hearted man who thought money was the only shield. I was wrong. Love is the only thing worth fighting for. We reached the gates of the estate 20 minutes later. The security was tight, the guards standing with rifles at the ready. Petrus met us at the door, his face grim. "Sir, you're injured. Let me call the doctor." Later, I snapped, "Where's my son?" "He's in the study." He wouldn't stay in the safe room once he heard the car pull up. I walked into the house, Zinhle leaning on me. Thabo Mokoena came running down the hallway, his small face etched with maturity that broke my heart. He saw the shattered window of the car to the front door. He saw the blood on my shirt, and he stopped. "Did the bad men win?" he asked, his voice small. I knelt, ignoring the pain in my shoulder, and opened my arms. He ran into them, and I held him so tight I could feel his heartbeat. "No, Thabo Mokoena," I said, looking up at Zinhle, who was being helped into a chair by Mrs. Gummead. "The bad men lost everything the moment I found you. From now on, this house is a fortress, and we are a family. Is Mama okay?" "Mama is a warrior," I said. That night, the mansion didn't feel like a museum. It felt like a home. I sat in the library, my shoulder bandaged, watching Zinhle and Thabo Mokoena on the sofa. They were looking at an old photo album Mrs. Gummead had found. Pictures of my parents, of the township, of the beginning of my empire. For the first time, I felt a sense of peace that no billion-rand deal could ever provide. The Iron Lion had found his pride. But as the clock struck midnight, Petrus entered the room. He held a tablet in his hand, and his expression told me that the war wasn't entirely over. "Sir, the news just broke. Elias Thorne's legal team is filing for bail, claiming the recording was illegally obtained and is inadmissible. And there's more. The board of Mokoena Holdings is meeting tonight in secret. They are trying to freeze your personal accounts, claiming the restoration trust you set up is a fraudulent diversion of company funds." I looked at Zinhle. She had heard everything. The soft-hearted boy I used to be wanted to throw the tablet into the fireplace and just hold her. But the billionaire, the man who knew how the world worked, knew that a lion cannot rest while the hyenas are still at the gate. "They want to freeze my accounts?" I asked, a cold smile spreading across my face. "Yes, sir. They want to leave you with nothing." I stood up. "Let them. They think my power comes from the numbers in a bank account. They've forgotten that I started with nothing but a dream and a woman who believed in me. If they take the money, they just make me more dangerous, because then I have nothing left to lose." I turned to Zinhle. "Tomorrow we go to the people. Not the board, not the lawyers. We go to the streets where you stayed. We tell the story of the Cumulo Empire and the man who tried to steal a child's future. We'll see how Mokoena Holdings handles a boycott from every South African who believes in justice." Zinhle stood up, her strength returning. "I'll stand beside you, Thabo. I'm not the mysterious stranger anymore. I am Zinhle Cumulo, and I want my father's name back. We'll get it back. I promised." But as I walked toward the window, looking out at the lights of the city, I saw a single, flickering light in the distance, at the very edge of my property. It was a signal fire. Someone was waiting for us in the dark. Someone who didn't care about trusts or boards. "Petrus," I whispered. "Someone is on the North Ridge." "I see it, sir. We're moving in." "No," I said, a strange intuition taking hold of me. "I'll go. Alone." "Sir, that's suicide." "It's not a threat, Petrus. It's a ghost." I walked out into the night, toward the ridge. As I climbed the hill, the air turned cold. Standing by the small fire was an old man, his clothes tattered, his face a road map of a hard life. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. Thabo Mokoena, The old man said, his voice like dry leaves. "You've done well to find her, but you've only found half the truth." "Who are you?" I demanded. "I was your father's partner before he died in the mines, and I was the one who helped Elias thorn-frame you 10 years ago. I've come to give you the one thing Elias couldn't steal." He reached into his coat and pulled out a heavy, rusted iron key. "What is that?" "The key to the original Kimolo vault. The one Elias never found. The one that contains the true deeds to the land this entire city is built on. It belongs to the boy, Thabo. And if you use it, you won't just be a billionaire. You'll be the king of the South." The old man handed me the key and vanished into the shadows before I could ask another question. I stood there, the cold iron heavy in my hand, realizing that the miracle was even bigger than I had imagined. But as I turned to head back to the house, I heard a scream from the mansion. It was Zinhle. I ran, my heart hammering, the key gripped tight. I burst through the front doors to find the foyer empty. The guards were slumped on the floor, unconscious. The front door was wide open, and on the marble floor, where Zinhle had once spilled her newspaper clippings, was a single, fresh rose. And a note, the key for the boy. "You have 1 hour." The high-stakes game had reached its final, most terrifying move. My son was gone. Under the harsh security floodlights, a battered white van sat idling. 3 men stood in the rain, looking like vultures circling a kill. They were rough, with the jagged edges of men who lived by the law of the street. But it wasn't them that made my heart stop. It was the boy. He couldn't have been more than 9 years old. He was standing in the mud, his small hands bound by a heavy rusted chain that looked like it had been taken from a construction site. He wasn't crying. His face was a mask of stone, a mask I recognized because I saw in the mirror every morning. He had my brow, my jawline, and the same defiant spark in his eyes that carried me out of the township. "Release him," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of my entire empire. The leader of the group, a man with a jagged scar across his nose, stepped forward. He didn't know who I was. He just saw a man in an expensive silk robe and slippers. "This woman, Zinhle, she owes us. She took protection money for her and the brat. She hasn't paid in 3 months. We don't care about your fancy house. Mynheer, we want our 20,000 rand, or the boy comes with us to work off the debt. 20,000 rand. A pittance. I spent more than that on a single pair of shoes. To think that my son, my blood, had been held in chains for the price of dinner in Sandton made a rage move through me so cold it felt like ice. "Petrus," I said, not taking my eyes off the boy. My head of security stepped forward, his hand hovering near his holster. "Yes, sir." "Go to the safe in my study. Bring me 50,000 rand in cash. Now." The thugs exchanged looks agreed. The leader smirked. 50,000? Maybe the price just went up, seeing as you're so rich. I stepped closer to the gate, the rain soaking my hair. I didn't feel like a billionaire in that moment. I felt like a lion. "The 50,000 is for the debt and for your silence. If you touch that boy again, or if you ever breathe the name Zinhle Kimolo again, I will not call the police. I will buy the very ground you stand on and bury your lives under legal injunctions, private investigators, and every resource my fortune can command. I will erase you from the city without ever lifting a finger." The sheer coldness of my voice silenced them. They saw the iron lion then. Petrus returned with the envelope. I grabbed it and shoved it through the bars of the gate. "Take it. Unchain the boy and vanish. If I see this van in Pretoria again, God help you." The man with the scar snatched the envelope, counted the notes quickly, and signaled to his companion. The heavy chain was unlocked, falling into the mud with a dull thud. They didn't stay a second longer. The van sped off, tires screeching against the wet asphalt. The boy stood there alone in the dark. He looked at the mansion, then at me. He didn't run to me. He didn't beg for help. He just stood his ground, shivering. "Open the gate," I commanded. As the heavy iron shifted, I walked out and knelt in the mud. I didn't care about the silk robe. I didn't care about the image. "What is your name?" I asked, my voice breaking. The boy looked at me, his lip trembling for the first time. "Thabo," he whispered. "My name is Thabo Mokoena. My mother said I was named after a king who didn't know his crown was waiting for him." I pulled him into my arms. He was stiff at first, his small body like a coiled spring, but then he collapsed against my chest, sobbing into my shoulder. I held him there in the rain, the miracle of his existence shattering the last of my cold-hearted defenses. "I'm here, Thabo," I whispered into his hair. "The king is home, and you are never, ever going back to that life." The next few hours were a blur of activity. I carried him inside, barking orders at the staff. Mrs. Gummidge, my housekeeper, had tears in her eyes as she took the boy to a warm bath. We found him some oversized clothes, one of my old sweaters that swallowed him whole, and fed him the first proper meal he'd probably had in years. I sat in the kitchen, watching him eat. He ate with frantic, desperate speed that made my chest ache. "Slow down, Thabo Mokoena," I said softly. "There's plenty more. All of this is yours." He looked up, a spoonful of stew halfway to his mouth. "Where's my mama?" "Those men, they said she went into big house. She's upstairs, sleeping. The doctor is with her. She's very sick, but she's going to get better. I promise you." "Are you the man from the pictures?" he asked suddenly. I froze. "What pictures?" He reached into the pocket of my sweater, the one he was wearing, and realized his own clothes had been taken for washing. "In Mama's book, she has pictures of a man. She told me that one day, when the stars aligned, he would find us and the bad dreams would stop. Are you him? Are you the billionaire?" "I am Thabo," I said, moving to sit beside him. "And I am your father." The boy stared at me for a long time. There was no joy, only a deep, haunting skepticism that no child should possess. "If you're my father, why were we sleeping on the street? Why did Mama cry every night? Because her tummy hurt from hunger while you were in this palace." It was the most honest question I had ever been asked, and it felt like a physical blow. How do you explain to a 9-year-old that pride and lies had kept a wall between us? Because I was blind, I said truthfully, "I thought your mother had left me because she didn't love me. I didn't know about you. If I had known, I would have moved mountains to find you." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't pull away when I rested my hand on his head. "Mama said you were a good man. Even when she was coughing and the rain was coming through the plastic sheets, she said you were the best thing that ever happened to her." I had to turn away so he wouldn't see the tears. The man who had fired executives without blinking was being undone by the words of a child. By dawn, the house was quiet. Thabo Mokoena had fallen asleep in a guest room, clutching a teddy bear Mrs. Gummidge had found in the attic. I went to check on Zinhle. She was still pale, but the color was slowly returning to her lips. The foredrip was working its miracle. I sat by her bed, the legal document, the birth certificate, resting on my lap. I began to realize the scope of the task ahead of me. It wasn't just about giving them money. Their trust had been betrayed by the world, and Zinhle had been betrayed by her own father. I needed to know the full truth of how the Cumulo Empire had fallen and who had truly benefited from her misery. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Victor," I said when the line picked up. Victor was my lead private investigator, a man who could find a needle in a haystack and then tell you who manufactured the needle. "Thabo, it's 4 a.m. Is their merger falling through?" "No. I need you to dig into the Cumulo estate. Go back 10 years. I want to know everything about Zinhle's father, his business partners, and exactly who seized their assets when he died. I want names, bank accounts, and every legal filing. The Cumulos? That's ancient history, Thabo. They went bust. I don't think they just went bust, Victor. I think they were liquidated from the inside. And I think the person who did it is still walking the streets of Johannesburg while the rightful heir was starving outside my office. Find them. I want to know who turned my son into a beggar." "I'm on it," Victor said, his tone turning serious. I hung up and looked at Zinhle. Her hand moved slightly on the silk coverlet. I took it in mine, marveling at how fragile she felt. "I'm going to fix this, Zinhle," I whispered. "I'm going to give you and Thabo the life you were supposed to have. And the people who did this to you, they are about to learn what happens when you steal from a lion. As the sun began to rise over Pretoria, casting a golden light across the room, Zinhle's eyes slowly opened. She looked at me, then at our joined hands. For a moment, there was no fear, only a soft, hazy recognition. "Thabo," she breathed. "I have him, Zinhle," I said, leaning closer. "I have our son. He's safe. He's fed. He's sleeping in the next room." A single tear escaped her eye and rolled into her hair. A look of such pure, so deep relief crossed her face that it felt like a new beginning for both of us. "You found him. I found both of you, and I'm never letting go again." But the peace was short-lived. A knock came at the door. Not the soft knock of a servant, but the sharp, insistent rapping of someone who didn't care about the hour. I stood up, a sense of foreboding washing over me. I opened the door to find Mrs. Gummidge, her face pale. "Sir, there are people downstairs. Important-looking people. They say they are from Child Protective Services. They say they received an anonymous tip that an abducted child is being held at this address." My blood ran cold. The men from the van. They hadn't just taken the money. They had tipped off the authorities to strike back at me where it hurt most. They knew that a billionaire with a homeless child in his house would look like a kidnapper to the law. "Don't let them near the boy," I hissed, stepping into the hallway. "And call my legal team. Tell them I want every senior partner at the house in 20 minutes. The battle for my family had only just begun. I stood at the top of the grand marble staircase, looking down into the foyer where the Iron Lion's lair had been invaded. My mansion, usually a sanctuary of quiet power, was now crawling with the very thing I had spent years avoiding: the prying eyes of the state. 2 police officers in blue uniforms stood by the door, their caps tucked under their arms, but their hands resting uncomfortably close to their holsters. Beside them was a woman who radiated the kind of cold, bureaucratic efficiency that didn't care about the size of a man's bank account. She wore a sharp charcoal suit, her hair pulled back into a bun so tight it seemed to pull the skin of her forehead. "I am Mrs. Abanda from the Department of Social Development," she said, her voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. "And I am not going to ask again, Mr. Mokoena. We received a report of a minor being held here under suspicious circumstances, a child matching the description of a boy recently seen with a vagrant woman. We have a duty to ensure his safety." I descended the stairs slowly, each step a calculated move of intimidation. I was the billionaire, the man who shaped the skyline of Johannesburg, and yet, in this moment, I felt like a cornered animal. My fortune could buy a fleet of private jets, but could buy me the right to be a father to a son I had only known for 4 hours? Suspicious circumstances? I repeated, reaching the bottom floor. I stood a head taller than Mrs. Abanda, but she didn't flinch. "This is my home, and the child you're referring to is my son." One of the police officers cleared his throat. "With respect, Mr. Mokoena, the report claims a child was brought here by force after a confrontation at your gates. There were mentions of chains." My jaw tightened. Those vultures from the van. They had taken my 50,000 rand and then turned around to bury me in a legal nightmare. They knew that in South Africa, the law takes matters of child endangerment very seriously. If the state took Thabo Mokoena now, he would be lost in the system of foster homes and overcrowded shelters before my lawyers could even file a motion. The boy was being held by criminals. I said, my voice low and dangerous. I rescued him. I paid off his captors to ensure his immediate safety. If you want to talk about chains, go find the men in the white van who were terrorizing a 9-year-old. That is for the police to investigate. Mrs. Abanda snapped. My concern is the boy's welfare. You are a single man with a reputation for being, let's say, less than soft-hearted. You have no record of a child. We have no record of a child. Until we can verify paternity and the fitness of this environment, the boy must come with us. Over my dead body, I hissed. Sir, don't make this a scene, the officer warned. At that moment, a small figure appeared at the edge of the hallway. Thabo Mokoena was standing there, shivering in my oversized sweater. He looked at the uniforms, the flashing lights through the glass doors, and the stern face of Mrs. Abanda. The terror in his eyes was so profound it felt like a physical weight in the room. "Papa," he whispered. The word hit the room like a thunderclap. Mrs. Abanda's eyebrows shot up. The police officers exchanged a look. I didn't wait for permission. I walked over to him, knelt on the cold marble, and pulled him into my arms. "It's okay, Thabo. Nobody is taking you anywhere." "Are they the bad men?" he asked, his voice muffled against my chest. "Are they going to put the chains back on?" "No," I said, looking up at Mrs. Abanda with a gaze that had made boardrooms tremble. "They are not." "Mrs. Abanda, you say you care about his welfare? Look at him. He is terrified of the safety you are offering. He has spent his life struggling on the streets of this city, abandoned by a society that didn't care if he lived or died. Now that he is in a mansion, fed and protected, you want to drag him back into the cold? Is that your version of destiny?" Mrs. Abanda looked at the boy, and for the first time, her bureaucratic mask slipped. She saw the bruises on his wrist from the chains, bruises I hadn't had the chance to heal yet. "I still need documentation, Mr. Mokoena," she said, though her voice had lost its edge. "And I need to see the mother." "The mother is upstairs, under care of a private doctor," I said. "She is recovering from severe pneumonia. You can see her, but you will not disturb her." The next hour was a grueling exercise in restraint. I led them to the West Wing. My legal team had arrived, 4 of the most expensive lawyers in the country, who now stood in my foyer like a wall of suits and briefcases. They handled the paperwork, presenting the birth certificate I had found in Zinhle's pocket. We entered the guest suite. Zinhle was awake, propped up by pillows. Mrs. Gummidge had brushed her hair and helped her into a clean silk nightgown, but she still looked hauntingly fragile. When she saw the police, she let out a small, strangled cry and reached for Thabo Mokoena, who ran to her side. "Mrs. Mokoena?" Mrs. Abanda asked, misusing the name. "It's Zinhle Cumulo," Zinhle whispered, clutching our son. "Please." "Thabo saved us. He is the father. He didn't know. He didn't know we were out there." I stood by the window, my heart breaking as I listened to Zinhle defend me, the man who had shouted at her in the rain. She spoke of the miracle of our reunion, of the betrayal she had suffered at the hands of her own family, and of the years of healing she now needed. Mrs. Abanda spent 20 minutes interviewing Zinhle and checking the medical charts provided by Dr. Naidu. Finally, she turned to me. "For now," she said, "the child remains here, but this is not over. I will be conducting a full home study. And Mr. Mokoena, if I find one shred of evidence that this boy is being used as a pawn in some billionaire's PR game, I will have him removed so fast your head will spin." "He is not a pawn," I said, walking her to the door. "He is my soul." When they finally left, the house felt suddenly hauntingly quiet. I went back to the West Wing. Thabo Mokoena had fallen asleep with his head on Zinhle's lap. She was stroking his hair, her eyes fixed on the moon outside the window. "Thank you, Thabo," she said softly. "Don't thank me," I replied, sitting at the foot of the bed. "I should have found you years ago. I should have been looking instead of building a fortune out of spite." "You couldn't have known," she said. "My father, he was a powerful man, Thabo. He didn't just lie to you. He erased us. He told the world I had run away with a lover. He told the world he had disowned me for my immorality. By the time he died and the money was gone, there was nobody left to tell the truth to. But who took the money, Zinhle? A fortune like the Cumulo Empire doesn't just vanish into thin air. Even with bad investments, there should have been something left." Zinhle's hand paused on Thabo Mokoena's head. A look of ancient, deep-seated fear crossed her face. His business partner, a man named Elias Thorne. He was like a brother to my father. But when the end came, Elias was the one who signed the papers that put us on the street. He said he was saving what was left, but we never saw a cent. He's the reason I couldn't get a job. He told every firm in the city that I was a thief. The name Elias Thorne hit me like a physical blow. Elias Thorne was a name I knew well. He was a regular in the boardrooms of Sandton. He was a philanthropist, a man of high values, who sat on the board of half the charities in the city. He was also a man I was currently in the middle of a merger with. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Victor, the private investigator. I stepped out into the hallway to take the call. Thabo, you aren't going to believe this. Victor's voice was tight with excitement. I went through the Cumulo liquidation records. It was a bloodbath. But here's the kicker. The company that bought up 90% of the Cumulo assets for pennies on the rand, it was a shell company called Crown Holdings. And guess who the silent director of Crown Holdings is? Elias Thorne. I said, the words tasting like poison. How did you know? Because the devil always sits at the head of the table. I growled. What else, Victor? There's more. I tracked the anonymous tip to Child Protective Services. It didn't come from the thugs in the van. Thabo, the thugs were just a muscle. The call was placed from a burner phone, but the GPS signal originated from the Thorne estate in Bryanston. He's watching you. He knows you found her, and he's trying to get her and the boy away from you before they can talk. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. This wasn't just a drama of the heart anymore. This was a war for my empire and my family. Elias Thorne hadn't just stolen fortune. He had stolen 10 years of my son's life. He had watched Zinhle starve while he sat in his mansion, drinking wine bought with her father's blood. Victor, I want everything, I said. I want the evidence of the fraud. I want the proof that he framed Zinhle. And I want to know exactly what his next move is. He thinks he's playing with a billionaire. He doesn't realize he's playing with a father. I hung up and looked through the doorway at Zinhle and Thabo J&R. They were a picture of resilience. Two people who had survived the worst the world could throw at them and were still standing. The Iron Lion was back, but this time he wasn't hunting for profit. He was hunting for justice. I walked back into the room and sat beside Zinhle. I took her hand in mine, feeling the warmth returning to her skin. This was our second chance, our miracle in the middle of a storm. Zinhle, I said, my voice steady. Tomorrow, the world is going to know the truth. Elias Thorne thinks he can take our son. He thinks he can keep the fortune he stole. But he has forgotten one thing. What's that? She asked. He's forgotten that you can't outrun destiny. And his destiny is me. She smiled then, a real, beautiful smile that reached her eyes. For a moment, we were back in the sun, 10 years ago, before the lies and the cold. I believe you, she said. But as I looked down at my phone, a new message flashed on the screen. It was an email from the board of Mokoena Holdings. Emergency board meeting called for 8 a.m. Subject, moral turpitude clause, and the allegations of child abduction. Elias Thorne had moved faster than I thought. He wasn't just coming for my son. He was moving to strip me of my empire before the sun even rose. He was using the very thing I had built to destroy, the only thing I now loved. I looked at the sleeping boy and the woman I had betrayed with my silence for a decade. I realized then that to save them, I might have to lose everything I had worked for. My fortune, my mansion, my empire. Was I ready to be a billionaire without a cent, as long as I had them? The answer came without a second of hesitation. Love wins, I thought, but first it has to fight. I stood up and began to dial my lead counsel. Wake everyone up, I said when he answered. We aren't going to the boardroom to negotiate. We're going to war. The cliffhanger hung in the air like the coming South African summer storm, thick, heavy, and ready to break the world apart. They wanted my chair. They wanted my title. They wanted the Iron Lion to be caged and silenced. But as I walked into the boardroom of Mokoena Towers at 8 a.m. sharp, they had no idea I was willing to burn the whole building down to keep my family safe. The room was freezing, the air conditioning humming like a predator. Around the massive obsidian table sat the 12 board members, men and women I had handpicked for their ruthlessness. At the head of the table sat Elias Thorne. He looked every bit the elder statesman of South African business in his charcoal gray suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Thabo, Elias said, his voice smooth as expensive cognac. Thank you for joining us. We know you've had a frantic night, rescuing vagrants and dealing with the police. It sounds like a script from a Nollywood movie, not the behavior of a CEO of a multi-billion rand empire. I didn't sit down. I stood at the foot of the table, my hands resting on the cool surface. I could see the digital displays behind him showing our stock price. It was dipping. The news of the police raid at my estate had already leaked to the press. "Let's skip the pleasantries, Elias," I said, my voice echoing in the silent room. "You called an emergency meeting to invoke the moral turpitude clause. You want me out because you say I brought the company into disrepute." "It's not just me, Thabo," Elias said, gesturing to the other board members. "The allegations are serious. Child abduction, harboring a woman with a criminal record for vagrancy and theft. The shareholders are panicking. We are a pillar of stability in Johannesburg. We cannot have a leader who is embroiled in a township-style drama." I looked at the board members. Some looked away, unable to meet my gaze. Others, bought and paid for by Elias, stared back with cold indifference. A pillar of stability? I laughed, a harsh, dry sound. Or a pillar of lies. You talk about high values. Elias, you talk about the reputation of this company. But let's talk about how you built your seat at this table. Let's talk about the Cumulo estate. The name hit the room like a physical shock. Elias's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of pure, unadulterated fear, before he smoothed it over. The Cumulos? That was a tragedy, a mismanagement. Elias said dismissively. The father was a gambler. The daughter was a socialite who couldn't handle the pressure. What does that have to do with Mokoena Holdings? It has everything to do with it, I said, pulling a tablet from my briefcase and sliding across the table. Because the Iron Lion doesn't just build, he hunts. And last night, I went hunting through the digital graveyards of your shell companies. Elias. I found a link between Crown Holdings and the offshore accounts you used to drain the Cumulo family dry, while Zinhle was pregnant with my child. A murmur went around the room. Elias's face turned a mottled shade of red. This is slander. These are the desperate fabrications of a man trying to save his job. I'm not trying to save my job, Elias, I said, stepping closer. I'm trying to save my soul. You told the world Zinhle was a thief. You made sure no one would hire her. You watched her sleep on the cold concrete of the city, while you lived in a mansion built on the fortune you stole from her father. You even tried to have my son taken by the state this morning just to keep her quiet. You have no proof. Elias roared, slamming his fist on the table. I have more than proof, I said. I have a witness. The heavy double doors of the boardroom opened. The board members turned in their seats. Zinhle walked in. She wasn't the broken woman in the rain anymore. She was wearing a deep emerald green dress that Mrs. Gummidge had sourced for her, a color that symbolized a new beginning. Her head was held high, her eyes fixed on Elias. She was pale, yes, and she leaned slightly on a cane, but she looked like the queen she was always destined to be. Behind her, my legal team followed like a phalanx of warriors. Elias, Zinhle said, her voice quiet, but carrying more power than all the billionaires in the room. Do you remember the night my father died? You told me you would take care of everything. You told me Thabo had moved on. You told me the only way to keep my baby safe was to disappear. You're a ghost, Zinhle, Elias hissed, though his voice trembled. Nobody believes a woman from the streets. The streets have long memories, Elias, Zinhle replied. She walked to the table and placed a small digital recorder on the obsidian surface. My father knew you were a snake. He knew you were skimming from the accounts. He recorded your final meeting. He hid it in a safe deposit box that he only gave me the key to in his final moments. A key I kept hidden in a plastic bag through 3 winters of homelessness. She pressed play. The voice that filled the room was unmistakably Elias Thorne's, but it was stripped of its boardroom polish. It was the voice of a predator. The girl is nothing, Cumulo. I'll make sure she's a pariah. And Thabo Mokoena? I'll frame him for the fraud myself. If you don't sign these papers, I'll send him to Pretoria Central for 20 years. Sign the assets over to Crown, or they both rot. The silence that followed was absolute. The board members looked at Elias as if he were a leper. The Iron Lion had just sprung the trap. Petrus, I called out. My head of security stepped into the room, followed by 2 officers from the Hawks, South Africa's elite crime fighting unit. Elias Thorne, the lead officer, said, "You are under arrest for fraud, racketeering, and the embezzlement of the Cumulo estate assets." You have the right to remain silent. As they led Elias away, he looked at me, his face twisted in a mask of hatred. You think you've won, Thabo? You've destroyed the stock price. You've ruined this company to save a beggar. I walked over to Zinhle and took her hand. I looked at the board members, who were now whispering frantically about damage control and exit strategies. I didn't ruin this company to save a beggar, I said, my voice cold and clear. I saved my family from a monster, and if the price of that is my fortune, then I am the richest man in Africa today. I turned to the board. I am resigning as CEO, effective immediately. I am liquidating my majority share. Half of it will go into a trust for the restoration of the Cumulo legacy. The other half will be used to build a foundation for the homeless mothers of Johannesburg, a place where no child will ever have to stand in chains for a debt of 20,000 rand. The board members gasped. Thabo, you can't be serious. You're walking away from billions. I'm walking toward a life, I said. I turned to Zinhle. For the first time in 10 years, the shadows in her eyes were gone. She looked at me with a love that was a miracle, a second chance I didn't deserve but was determined to earn. Let's go home, Zinhle, I whispered. Thabo Mokoena is waiting. We walked out of the Mokoena Towers for the last time. The sun was shining over the city of Johannesburg, the city of gold. But as I looked at the woman beside me, I realized the only gold that mattered was a heart that had stayed true through the darkest of nights. We got into the limousine, but this time the partition was down. We sat close, our hands intertwined. What now, Thabo? She asked. You've given up your empire. I haven't given up anything, I said, leaning back against the leather. I have my name. I have my son. And I have the woman who was my secret admirer when I was a boy with nothing. We have a new beginning. Zinhle, a destiny that isn't written in bank statements, but in the time we have left. But as we pulled away from the curb, a black SUV began to tail us. I saw it in the side mirror, a vehicle with tinted windows, keeping a steady distance. My heart, which had just found peace, began to race again. Elias Thorne was in custody, but a man with his connections didn't fall alone. There were others who had profited from the Cumulo downfall, others who wouldn't want the truth to spread. Sifo, I said to the driver, don't go straight to the estate. Take the long way through the hills. We have company. Is everything okay? Zinhle asked, sensing my tension. Everything is going to be fine, I said, pulling her closer. But as the black SUV accelerated, I realized that the Iron Lion had one more fight left before the happy ending could truly begin. The SUV suddenly swerved, tried to ram us off the road as we entered the winding curves of the Johannesburg outskirts. Hold on, Sifo yelled. The tires screeched as we skidded toward the edge of a ravine. This wasn't about a boardroom anymore. This was about survival. I will tear this city apart stone by stone. If a single hair on my son's head is touched, there is no corner of this earth where you can hide. My roar echoed to the hollow halls of my mansion, a sound so raw it didn't belong to a billionaire. It belonged to a father whose soul had been ripped out. I stood in the foyer, the heavy iron key biting into my palm, looking at the spot where Thabo Mokoena had been standing just moments ago. The silence that followed my outburst was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. Zinhle was on her knees, her hands pressed against the cold marble, her sobs coming in ragged, desperate gasps. Not again, Thabo. Please, not again. I survived the hunger. I survived the cold, but I cannot survive losing him. Not after we finally found you. I dropped down beside her, pulling her into my arms. My shoulder was bleeding. My empire was crumbling, and my son was in the hands of monsters. But in that moment of absolute darkness, a strange, cold clarity settled over me. The Iron Lion wasn't just a nickname. It was who I had to be to survive the township, and it was who I had to be to save my blood. They don't want him, Zinhle, I whispered into her hair, my eyes fixed on a rose left on the floor. They want the key. They want the truth buried. And they think I'm a man who cares more about his bank account than his heart. They are about to learn how wrong they are. I stood up, pulling Zinhle with me. Petrus, get the cars ready. Not the Maybach. Get the armored SUVs. And call the chief of police. Tell him that if he wants to keep his job past sunrise, He meets me at the old Cumulo industrial site in Soweto in 30 minutes. The old warehouse? Petrus asked, his hand already on his radio. Sir, that place has been a ruin for years. That's exactly why they're there, I said. It's where Elias Thorne first stole the Cumulo legacy. It's where he thinks he's going to finish it. The drive to Soweto was a blur of neon lights and high-speed adrenaline. I sat in the back of the SUV, staring at the rusted iron key. The old man on the ridge, my father's partner, had said it unlocked the truth. I realized then that my father hadn't just died in the mines as a poor laborer. He and Zinhle's father had been building something together, a secret partnership that Elias Thorne had murdered to keep for himself. We arrived at the industrial site. It was a graveyard of rusted steel and broken glass, silhouetted against the Johannesburg skyline. A single light flickered from the upper floor of the main warehouse. Stay here, I commanded Petrus and his team as we pulled up. Sir, we can't let you go in alone. They are watching, I said, pointing to the security cameras that shouldn't have been working but were glowing with a sinister red light. If they see a tactical team, they'll kill him before we reach the door. I go in with the key. You move in only when I give the signal. I stepped out of the car. The night air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and rain. I walked toward the warehouse, every step heavy with the weight of my destiny. I pushed open the heavy steel door. It groaned on its hinges, revealing a cavernous space filled with shadows. In the center of the room, under a single buzzing industrial light, was Thabo Mokoena. He was tied to a chair, his eyes wide with terror, but he wasn't crying. When he saw me, a spark of hope lit up his face. Papa, stay quiet, son, I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. I'm here. From the shadows stepped a man I recognized instantly. It wasn't Elias Thorne. He was behind bars, but it was his son, Marcus. Marcus had grown up in the same elite circles I had fought to enter, a man who had been handed everything and deserved none of it. He held a silenced pistol in one hand and a tablet in the other. The great Thabo Mokoena, Marcus sneered, his voice dripping with the arrogance of the entitled. The man who thinks he can dismantle a dynasty because he found a woman in the gutter. You should have stayed in your boardroom, Thabo. You should have let the beggar rot. The only thing rotting in this room is the Thorne name, Marcus. I said, holding up the iron key. Is this what you're willing to kill for? An old piece of metal? That piece of metal opens a vault that contains the digital signatures for the land rights of half the central business district. Marcus hissed. My father spent 30 years making sure those documents stayed lost. If they come to light, every building we own, every cent of our fortune, reverts to the Cumulo estate. And you're going to hand it over, or I'm going to make sure your second chance ends right here. He leveled the gun at Thabo Mokoena's head. My blood ran cold, but I didn't flinch. I took a step forward. You want the key? Take it. But you should know something about my father, Marcus. He wasn't just a miner. He was a locksmith. He taught me that a key is only useful if you know which door it opens. What are you talking about? Marcus demanded. This key doesn't just open a vault. I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. It's a transmitter. The moment I stepped onto this property, the signal from this key began uploading the contents of the Cumulo vault to every major news outlet in South Africa. The truth is already out, Marcus. The deeds, the fraud, the recordings of your father. It's all live on the internet. You aren't fighting for a fortune anymore. You're fighting for a longer sentence. Marcus's face went pale. He looked down at his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen. I saw the moment the realization hit him. The Iron Lion had played the ultimate game of high-stakes poker, and the Thorns had finally run out of chips. You're lying, Marcus screamed, his finger tightening on the trigger. Check the news, Marcus. I said, the police are already at your estate. They aren't coming for me. They're coming for you. In that split second of hesitation, I didn't wait. I didn't think about the gun or the danger. I moved with the speed of a man who had nothing to lose. I tackled Marcus, the weight of my rage slamming him into the concrete floor. The gun skittered away into the darkness. We fought with a primal ferocity, but Marcus was a man of silk and soft edges. I was a man of the township, forged in the fires of struggle. I pinned him to the floor, my hands around his throat, the image of my son in chains flashing before my eyes. No more, I growled. No more stealing from children. No more hiding in the shadows. Thabo, stop. It was Zinhle's voice. She had slipped past the guards and was standing at the entrance, her face bathed in the moonlight. She wasn't looking at Marcus. She was looking at me. Don't become like them, she pleaded. If you kill him, they win. They take your soul, and then Thabo Mokoena has no father. We don't need revenge. Thabo, we need justice. I looked at my son, who was watching me with wide, terrified eyes. I looked at the woman who had sacrificed 10 years of her life to keep me safe. Slowly, I let go of Marcus's throat. I stood up, breathing hard, the rage leaving me like a receding tide. You're right, I whispered. The sound of sirens filled the air, the blue and red lights reflecting off the broken windows of the warehouse. Petrus and the police swarmed the building. Marcus was dragged away in handcuffs, his arrogance replaced by a pathetic, whining plea for his lawyers. I ran to Thabo Mokoena, slicing through his bonds with a pocket knife. He threw his arms around my neck, sobbing now that the danger was over. I picked him up, holding him against my chest, and walked toward Zinhle. We stood together in the middle of that ruined warehouse. A billionaire, a woman who had been homeless yesterday, and a boy who had been a beggar. But as the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the Johannesburg sky in shades of orange and gold, we weren't those things anymore. We were a family. 1 month later, the gardens of the Mokoena estate were in full bloom. The Iron Lion hadn't lost his empire. He had transformed it. The truth revealed by the Iron Key had caused a seismic shift in the South African business world. The Thorn assets had been seized, and a massive portion of the city's land had been returned to the Cumulo Trust. But I didn't keep it for myself. I stood on the terrace of our new home, a place built for comfort, not just for show, watching Thabo Mokoena run across the grass with a group of children. These weren't the children of billionaires. They were the children from the shelter Zinhle, and I had opened 2 weeks ago, the Zinhle Cumulo Center for Resilience. Zinhle walked out onto the terrace, wearing a simple but elegant African print dress. She looked healthy, her skin glowing, the light back in her eyes. She leaned against the railing beside me. You're thinking about the boardroom again, she teased, taking my hand. I'm thinking about how lucky I am, I said, kissing her forehead. I used to think my fortune was my greatest achievement. I was wrong. My greatest achievement was finding my way back to you. Destiny has a funny way of working, doesn't it? She mused. It took us through the gutters to get to the stars. It took us home, I replied. The poetic justice was complete. Elias Thor and his son were awaiting trial for crimes that would keep them behind bars for the rest of their lives. The Cumulo name was once again a symbol of integrity and strength. And I, the cold-hearted billionaire, had found that the only empire worth building is one built on a foundation of love and truth. I looked at the small iron key, now framed and hanging in my study. It was a reminder that no matter how much gold you have, the most valuable things in life, trust, family, and a second chance, can never be bought. They can only be earned. As the sun set over the city, I realized that my story wasn't just about a billionaire and a beggar. It was about the resilience of the human spirit. It was a miracle that it started in the rain and ended in the light. Love wins. Always. Thank you for joining us for this incredible journey on the Royal Griot. We hope the story of Thabo, Zinhle, and their son has touched your heart and reminded you that it is never too late for a new beginning. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more gripping stories like this. What do you think happens next for the Mokoena Cumulo family? Should Thabo Mokoena follow in his father's footsteps or forge his own path? Comment below.